sure some of you, and I certainly did, first got to know who you were as a video essayist. You did some really great pieces on great directors, so we were talking about a few of them earlier. But how did you, at what point in that process did you decide, after doing that for a number of years, that you wanted to take the tools you were learning about from these other filmmakers and applying them to your own work? And how did you sort of land on this as the subject?
Yeah, first, thank you guys for coming out on Saturday afternoon.
Before I forget, just so I want to, who's from Columbus again? Like, how many of you are from actual? Tons. Okay.
Yeah, that's amazing. Yeah, you know, part of the reason why I started making these video essays was just to be a part of the conversation of cinema, which meant really so much to me and in my life, and it did afford me this opportunity to engage cinema and also in a way that was creative. But the aspiration was always to eventually make a film, you know, if that, the possibility of that. Yeah, and through that work, you know, and especially once I started working with the British Film Institute and the Criterion Collection, more opportunities opened up, and eventually a programmer at Tribeca had reached out to me and asked if I was ever going to make a feature or something larger that they would be interested. And it really was a spark for me to say, this might be the moment, you know, to make my own feature. So
how did Columbus first, the place first, enter your field of vision, and what made it sort of uniquely cinematic? Well, I mean, that's a dumb question, but what did you think made it uniquely cinematic?
Yeah. You know, I was sort of beginning to think about a feature, and I knew it was going to be about the burden. I knew it was going to be about fathers and sons, and mothers and daughters, and really the burden that children have in regard to the sort of the looming absence of a parent or parents. You know, my father and mother are getting older, and every time I come home, I feel that. And my children are getting older, and I feel their, you know, impending absence. So that was really on my mind, and I wanted to make a film that explored that. And then I had read an article about Columbus in the New York Times, and separate from the film, I was just really curious about this town. I'm a bit of an architecture nerd, and I thought, oh, I got to visit the town, and I was almost immediately overwhelmed by it and moved by this town, and you know, a few hours after visiting, you know, we're still there, but during lunch, I had said to my wife, I have to make a film here, you know, and then I sort of married this town, which I think inherently is about making sense out of absence. You know, I think modernism itself is a part of that pursuit, and it seemed to marry well with this story I wanted to tell.
This came up, all right, in my head it came up, but I didn't actually get a chance to ask the question yesterday, but I told you a little while ago, I grew up in DC, which is like growing up in a museum. And I wondered from the people that are from there, and maybe you got a sense of it when you were working there, that it doesn't feel like a normal town, or maybe it does, but it feels like you're in an art gallery, living in an art gallery or a museum. Did you get a sense of that? Like that it's not, it is in many ways probably like a normal smaller town, but at the same time, you've got tour groups going through it all the time, and I'm wondering, like, what was your sense of that?
Yeah, and you know, that's a good question for the people who
on display.
In Columbus. Yeah, you know, I went back there a few more times just for research, and yeah, you know, I think in one way it's not like a museum at all, because architecture is never just an art object, you know, and I think it's what makes that form so unique, I think, in the realm of creativity, you know, because we inhabit architecture, it becomes a part of our daily lives, it's very easy for it to just be a part of the environment. And I think that is the reality of Columbus, that for them it is their town, it is their school, it is their city hall, and it's something that they've always known. But I think like there are people like Casey in that town who become really aware or attuned that these are buildings, or I think that everyone knows that these are buildings that have some significance. But like all art forms, when like cinema or movies are just movies until something strikes you and it feels like it might be something more than that. And so I think there are people in that town where they do see, like they understand that they're among buildings that are saying something as well.
I wrote this down, there's a quote near the beginning. Oh, I think it's actually when Casey is talking about that, the building. She's talking about the cross on the front of that building, and she says it's asymmetrical, but it's somehow still balanced. I feel like that describes a lot of the people in this movie as well. That there's something just a little, and like for example, that they both seem to have one dominant parent in their life, and yet somehow they both found ways to balance their lives as they get older. Talk about that aspect of it, that these people that are all a little bit, damage might be saying going too far, but just a little, there's something a little askew in their life that they found a way somehow to bring it back around. And
yeah, I mean, that's a really insightful, and I never really thought about it in that way, but you're right. I mean, I think they are, when we visit them, they are all a little bit out of balance, and I think that they're trying to find some harmony in their lives, or they're trying to make sense of that, because there's some lack, and they both have single parents. They both there's a lot of things unresolved. So yeah, I think when Saarinen, the father, was building that church, it was his desire to kind of put create an asymmetrical world that could nonetheless be balanced, and I think that also spoke to what we were trying to do as well.
And Jin and the relationship that Jin and Casey have is also, they sort of balance each other out, because he grew up in this immersed in architecture, and as a result he says he hates it, whereas she doesn't really know that much about it as an architect would. She hasn't studied it, but she loves it and she's passionate about it, and that's a wonderful balance that they strike. And they both seem to appreciate different things about architecture as a result of knowing each other through this film. Is there sort of a, completing each other that balance there?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's why, it's an odd pairing, an Asian older man and this young woman, but I do think that they're connecting because, because of that sort of counterbalance, and it is, and I think I think Jin is resisting architecture because it represents his father, and it's something his father loves, and maybe Jin has felt jealous of it, but it's only through the eyes of someone like Casey that he can see what his father sees and loves, and by that kind of draw closer to him. It's through the fresh eyes of someone that he has no connection to. His father, I'm sure, tried a lot of times to make him love what he loved, but he was resistant to that. And I think familiarity breeds contempt, and I think I love the familiar, shares the same word with family, and sometimes family breeds contempt because you're so familiar until you're not, until you're away, and then appreciation, occurs.
I want to